Hello, my name is Dr. Charles Durr, and I'm diplomat of the American Association of Integrative Medicine. And I'm here today to talk about detoxification. And so before we get started, I'd like to clarify a few definitions as to what detoxification actually is. And so detoxification is when you actually dislodge a toxin from its resting place inside a cell or what have you. Okay? So detoxification is removal of the initial toxin. Now, removal of that toxin and elimination and excretion through the body is what we call drainage. Okay? And then there's what's called free radicals. And so when you remove a toxin from its resting place, so to speak, you have two vulnerable issues that you have to worry about. It creates free radicals that have to be squelched, all right, which can do damage in what we call oxidation. And we have to remove it, i.e. drainage. And so the drainage occurs through the bloodstream, the lymphatic system, and is excreted out through the kidneys and the liver, and sometimes through the sweat glands as well. So detoxification is technically just dislodgement of a toxin from its resting place. Now, theories on toxicity come in three main parts. One is called the dose-dependent theory. In other words, how much you get at a single exposure could create the toxicity. Okay. Then there's the time-dependent build-up theory. In other words, over time you get exposed and enough builds up that it creates a problem. And the third and more modern and more recent theory is what we call the tilt theory. Toxic-induced loss of tolerance. Meaning that it's not so much the toxin that's the problem, it's your tolerance to that toxin that is basically the problem. And what I mean by that is that our body has innate ability to squelch free radicals, to detoxify our body, and to modulate our immune system. And so modulation means how does your body react when it's exposed to what we call an antigen. Now, an antigen can be a bug, like a parasite, yeasts, bacteria, virus, things like that. A food, unfortunately, can become an antigen. So gluten, wheat, soy, dairy, things along that lines. And toxins can become an antigen. And so your body has innate capacities to deal with antigens by what we call the phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification systems. Okay? And certain key nutrients are critical for this process. First among them is called glutathione. And so if you have a depletion of your natural stores or an inability to recycle glutathione, either from what we call methylation defect or just overuse of the glutathione system, either by toxins or pollution or poor dietary habits or medications or what have you. And so if you are depleted of glutathione, then toxins can proliferate. They're not eliminated naturally. And glutathione is what we call a natural chelator. I'll get into chelation later, but chelation basically is how you remove certain things like toxins and heavy metals from the body. And it can be very dangerous, which I also will get into later. And so the toxic-induced loss of tolerance is primarily due to either a depletion of your immune modulators, glutathione, and things that help your immune system behave properly, what we call our T regulatory cells, so it doesn't overreact. And that we then what's called cross-react. So a cross-reaction would be, say, example, you have a toxic load of mercury, and your immune system has become aware of it, and it's bound to a human protein. Now that human protein can get attacked by our immune system. So that toxic mercury, human protein, now we have an immunoglobulin with an antibody attached, and that creates an immune response. All right. Now that response can get out of hand and cross-react and become what is commonly referred to as an autoimmune condition. And so immune modulation is the control of our overreaction of our immune system. Okay. So modulation is a key. Now another factor is the barrier systems. And so the gut barrier, the blood-brain barrier, protect us from overexposure of antigens, whether it be foods, bugs, toxins, and so forth. So if you have a healthy blood-brain barrier and a healthy lung epithelial barrier and a healthy gut barrier, your exposure to toxins will be reduced, or the exposure to all antigens in particular will be reduced there as well. Okay? And so we'll get into who's a good candidate for detoxification in a moment. But first I want to talk about how we test for toxins. Okay? And so there's many ways to test for them. One being hair. And hair can be fairly reliable to give us a gauge of long-term exposure, particularly if heavy metals will show up in the hair. We can do urine, we can do blood. All of them will have some sort of reliability. But what they all have in common is they show us the toxic load. They don't show us what's happening with that in our immune system. In other words, you could have a load of mercury, but your immune system is not aware of it, and it sits inert, stored in a fat cell, and it's really not bothering anything. Then when we go to remove it through detoxification, then it is going to be in the bloodstream as it tries to get drained. Remember, we talked about detoxification is removal from the cell. As it's traveling through the bloodstream, it can then become exposed to our immune system, create an immunoglobulin, an immune complex, which then triggers an immune response, which then can become dangerous. All right. So the hair, the urine, the blood all test for the load, or how much is in there. Right. Now, one way of testing that is much more accurate and much better is doing antibody testing, immune complexes. And so I'm going to go over the things that you see here, these household items. Each have a specific toxin in them. All right. And I'm going to talk about some antibody testing that can be done to see if you have an immunoglobulin complex with the toxin, with the human protein, and an antibody. Then, and only then, is the toxin a problem. Or removing it, if it's not an immunoglobulin, is not as important as if you have antibodies against it. Okay? So some of these common household items, peanut butter. All right? So peanut butter and all grains, all nuts, all seeds, anything that's stored or in a silo can have what's called aflatoxin. Aflatoxin is basically the toxic waste produced by microorganisms, and so they're as they die, they create this aflatoxins, part of their excretion, and it can contaminate rice, beans, nuts, all grains that are stored in a silo. So aflatoxin is something you can get there. Now, parabens. Parabens are in all lotions, cosmetics, deodorants, sunscreen, anything that you really see in any kind of lotion form will contain parabens. All right. Parabens can react to our immune system and create an immunoglobulin complex, which will create an immune response. Since you're putting it all over your skin, it gets absorbed very readily. All right. Stain remover. All right. Stain remover can have tetrachloroethylene in it. All right. So if you're using a lot of cleaning products, just not stain remover, you may get exposure through the skin there as well. We see lubricants and solvents can have benzene in them. Smoking cigarettes, gas fumes at the gas station, all can contain benzene, which can build up in a toxic load. We have water bottles, and many people know about BPA, bisphenol A, which is a substance in plastic that is toxic. All right, bisphenol A can be seen in a lot of things, and it can leach through the water, and particularly if you heat the water or sun exposure, it's going to leach in. So drinking from plastic that has BPA in it will give you a toxic exposure to that. And then we have what I call the triad. All right, a styrofoam cup is estrogenic. So when you expose it to heat, it's going to release chemicals that stimulate the production of estrogen. All right, so it increases your risk of breast cancer and things like that. Then when you have a hot beverage in it, and you put your little straw in here, this has BPA in it and other chemicals that can be leached out through the hot beverage. And then the lid itself is going to be exposed to the heat and leaching the BPA and other substances out through or down into the beverage there. So you want to be careful with your hot beverages. All right. Super strength paper towels can have formaldehyde in them. So if you've got those stretchy, bouncy ones they promise that you can wring them out 10 times, probably has formaldehyde in it. All right. Now, one thing you may not know has BPA in it is your thermal receipt. All right. Now, how many times do you lick your fingers and touch these and kind of sort through them and lick your fingers again? You can get exposed to bisphenol A by touching your receipt and then touching your mouth or having it seep through your skin and your fingertips. Foams. All right. Anything like a a mattress or an undercarpet garment, padding, has isocyanate, which is basically polyurethane. Okay, polyurethane can seep through your feet if you're wearing this, or if you're sleeping on it, or if you're resting your head on it. You're going to get exposed to polyurethane, or what's called isocyanate, which can be toxic as well. Now, many people don't know, but electronics contain tetrabromo bisphenol A. It's a special kind of bisphenol A, and it's in all electronics, whether it be keyboards, computers, phones, is a toxic source of BPA. A lot of people know there's mercury and so forth in tuna, and so it can show up in tuna fish. And then batteries can expose you to lead, cadmium, and other mixed heavy metals. Right? And so these are just a few household items that can expose you to toxins. And so that leads me to my next point. I want to go over a test that's available. So I mentioned the blood, the hair, the urine, and then I mentioned the antibody tests. And so this is Array 11 from Cyrex Labs. And so I'm going to go over a little case study here. This was a patient of ours who had peripheral neuropathy, which is an autoimmune condition that was affecting the nerves in his feet. This particular person was a professional fisherman. He was a fishing guide, okay? And so he was concerned about mercury exposure because he eats a lot of fish and so forth. And so we did a hair analysis on him. So this is his hair analysis, okay? And it came back with high levels of mercury and high levels of lead. And not a big surprise, okay, being that he eats a lot of fish. Right? So he was very concerned about the toxic load of mercury, and he was very anxious to get it removed. And I said, well, let me caution you that A, first we need to see if your immune system knows it's in there. And B, if we try to remove it in your present state of health, it will become a bigger problem. All right? And so he wanted to get it chelated. Now, chelation can be effective to remove heavy metals, but if your detoxification is matching your drainage and your squelching of free radicals that are created by the detoxification, what you will do then is create a monster. And so if you don't drain it fast enough, all those mercury antibody immune complexes will get redeposited. We call this the detox ping pong, all right? But where it usually gets deposited is not back where it came from. Usually it will be attracted to an electromagnet called the brain, all right? And if your blood-brain barrier is not patent, the immune complex will cross there and then create cross-reactivity in the brain. And so I said, you have neuropathy now, I don't want to give you MS, okay? So we're not going to do this until we get a few key markers in place. And so I told him that we need to get his glutathione levels up, and so that indicate on blood work, his homocysteine needed to be below 7. His thyroid panel needed to show strong function. His liver panel needed to show strong function. And so I looked at his blood urea nitrogen, it had to be above 13. His MCV had to be below 92. His vitamin D had to be above 60. Those are the immune markers that I use, or the blood markers I use to tell if somebody has the immune modulators in place to handle a detoxification. All right. Then I looked at his gut barrier, and we had to do some gut repair there so that we didn't overexpose his body. And so once I knew his vitamin D was there, his glutathione was there, his gut barrier was safe, his liver was working well, his thyroid was stimulating his gut and his liver to work properly, then I said, okay, let's check to see if mercury is a problem. So we did this test, and this is Cyrex Array 11. Interestingly enough, mercury and all heavy metals came back non-reactive. Right? So if we would have got ahead and panicked and took away his mercury, we probably would have created a monster. Right? But interestingly enough, 3 things came up. Polyurethane, the isocyanate from plastic. He was touching fishing line all day, putting it in his mouth, tying knots, tying ropes, and he had a sailboat business as well, and he's touching these polyurethane ropes all day, so he was absorbing it, and it was very reactive. All right, we saw that he had BPA, plastic. All right, he was touching plastic water bottles, drinking gallons of water through plastic water bottles all day because he's on the water, and he had parabens, antibodies. All right, putting sunscreen constantly all day. So he was eating the fish, which was not causing the problem. It was the sunscreen, it was the water bottle, and it was the fishing line and the ropes that he was touching. That became a problem. And so what we then did is help him slowly detoxify those issues with the use of glutathione, vitamin D, immune modulators, gut repair, and then slow, safe detoxification processes. Right. And so that was just one case, but that's a very common case. And I unfortunately have seen a lot of people who come in with signs of mercury toxicity, or I should say mercury load, and they go through chelation, and they develop an autoimmune condition, particularly in the brain, unfortunately, because the detox was outpacing the drainage and the squelching of the free radicals. All right? Because remember, when you detox, you create free radicals when you dislodge the toxin, and if your drainage is not as fast as your detox, you're going to get redeposition and exposure to your immune system. All right? And so those are some very key points to understand when it comes to detoxification. All right? The program has to be very, very safe and sound and slow. Anything that is a rush to get toxins out of your body could cause bigger problems with autoimmune cross-reactivity, free radical exposure, and redeposition of those toxins. And so my process is to start with blood work, assess your metabolic health, I assess your barrier systems, I assess your immune modulators. All right? And if they're all in place, and you do have, in fact, antibodies, immune complexes against those toxins, then we begin the detoxification process. And so I call this integrative detox. And so if you're interested in being evaluated to see if you have a toxic load, or to talk to me about our integrative detoxification program, please call the number below and we'd be happy to talk to you. Thanks for listening.